Everyone. We're going to reconvene our Executive Committee special meeting for public input from April 26th. Thank you all for attending tonight. At this time, I'm going to ask Ms. Morlock to call the roll.
Member Martin.
Here.
Member Wendt.
Present.
Member Barnett.
Present.
Member Metzger.
Present.
Member Woolrab. Absent. Member Schaefer.
Here.
Member Soldner.
Here.
Member Erickson.
Here.
Chairman McIntyre.
Here, we have 8 members present, 1 absent, and so we do have a quorum. It should be noted, I think Member Woolrab is scheduled to speak, and so if she comes in after her time on the order of speaking, we'll move her down and give her an opportunity to speak a little bit later, because it looks like she may have been held up. Let's go ahead and then, at this time, we should get started right away. We have 30 public speakers tonight. I want to remind everyone who is here in person and listening, public speakers will have 5 minutes to give their speech, and they are welcome to place on file with our county administration any other documents, including a written copy of their speech. I want to remind everyone that we are currently working on determining the number of members for the board and the number of districts at this time. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to tell you, we do have 30 minutes, and let's let the record be noted that Ms. Woolrab did come in just now and will be considered as present. I'm going to go ahead and with our speakers and tell you that since we have 30 speakers, we'll take a 10 to 15 minute recess after our 15th speaker for the convenience of everyone here, and then we'll reconvene. And I'll make that announcement at the time. Starting out tonight, we'll first of all have Mr. Thomas Witt, and he is here in person. Mr. Witt, may you please come to the podium.
All right, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. This is a copy of an email that I sent to Member Schaefer and Bloomfield and Chair McIntyre last week. Dear members and Chair McIntyre, as a resident of McLean County District 9, I'm writing to express my concern over the current redistricting process. You're no doubt aware that our county is split nearly 50-50 in partisan terms, and our current district boundaries, while not perfect, at least ensure a number of competitive races every 2 years. One would assume that the redistricting process in such an evenly divided county would be open, bipartisan, and transparent, but to this point, I have seen little evidence that this is the case. Member Woolrab raised many of these points in last night's board meeting, but in the absence of a true bipartisan redistricting plan, I would appreciate the following items in writing as soon as possible. 1, the names of any outside groups or consultants, either individuals or organizations, paid or unpaid, assisting the board majority in drawing their maps. Number 2, the software programs or data resources being used for same. Number 3, any demographic information being used to determine district boundaries, including but not limited to age, race, homeownership, and voting records, either partisan lean or voting propensity relating to individual household or precinct level data. And number 4, all records of meetings and discussions between board members relating to the redistricting process. This was sent to the 3 members on April 27th. I received an email from the county administration treating this request as a FOIA and nothing else. Absolutely nothing from my representatives, the chair, or any other member of the board. So I stand here tonight as someone who pays your salaries, asking you why this information has not been given and what the excuse would be for not giving it. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker in person is Mr. Jim Farley.
Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the McLean County Board at these hearings. My name is Jim Fraley. I am a farmer and resident of McLean County for nearly 40 years. I also served McLean County, Martin Township as its supervisor. But I'm here tonight provide a rural citizen's perspective on this issue of reapportionment within the McLean County Board. It's important for me to keep a strong rural presence on the county board. I appreciate the opportunity to elect board members who are from our rural areas, not elected as at-large members. In this manner, I am electing board members who know our specific needs, are involved in our local communities, and are easily approachable. I strongly believe McLean County government's districts, the state's single largest county by area, need to represent a geographic diversity and ensure the representation for our rural areas. This also empowers each voter by assuring them that their vote will provide their board member with a strong representative voice rather than a watered-down representation resulting from a larger or unwieldy board. Our township is certainly appreciative of the work and services we receive from the county. For example, overweight frost patrols by the county sheriff's office, county engineers helping us with bridge inspections and construction, and the county maintaining ample supplies of road signage, culverts, and materials. I know that our road commissioner or I can contact our county board members if there is ever an issue or a question that arises. I also support not increasing the size of the county board, but maintaining its size of 20 board members. Larger government is not something that will improve the county's inner workings and would simply add to the complexity of doing business. Keep our rural representation strong by not expanding our county board size or moving toward at-large elections of board members. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fraley, and I apologize. My list says Mr. Farley in the pronunciation. Next, we'll have in person Mr. Adam Heenan.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Adam Heenan, and I'm here tonight representing over 3,000 members of the Bloomington Normal Trades and Labor Assembly, the AFL-CIO, Central Labor Council for this region. And despite its name, it's the democratic body for all AFL-CIO members across McLean, Livingston, Logan, and DeWitt counties. The last time I spoke before this council, I charged that the body was replicating the Chicago version of democracy, meaning you were making decisions behind closed doors and declaring what's best for the rest of us. The Committee for County Redistricting is doing this again today, making decisions in the dark and putting the entire county at risk for potentially illegal results. The discussions that have been purported in the media, reducing the number of districts, reapportionment with more weight towards rural areas of the county, are ill-advised and sound on its face to be susceptible to expensive legal action. As a voter and taxpayer, I'm dismayed, but as a unionist, I'm appalled. We in the AFL-CIO may not be perfect, but we always take voting rights very, very seriously. And our memory is long. Unions operate based on the assumption about sustainable relationships. We know that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So in turn, we say nothing about us without us. When it comes to representative democracy, we expect that the democracy will be representative. So long as you're drawing maps behind closed doors, you're seeking to have us for supper, and that's not a position we're likely to abide. Moreover, if you continue to take these actions before the census numbers are official, then it will have been evident you're doing so with an intent to prevent certain populations, largely voters in Bloomington and Normal, from having access to full representation. Your action on this item would turn our representative House of board members into a body that's more akin to the US Senate, the most consistently derided and contemptibly undemocratic institution in our country. You're going from a House of Commons to a House of Lords, because those of you who have drafted such a redistricting plan have plantation mentality, where you believe some do not deserve as much voice for themselves. What say you, members of the board? Would representation amounting to 3/5 of a vote suffice? Simply put, regardless of intent, the impact of your plan is racist. So let me be crystal clear. Shame on you for your bald-faced attack on the Voting Rights Act. Shame on you for taking action in secret, and shame on you for trying to devalue the electoral impact of some county residents in an effort to reshape county governance to your preference. You should always strive to do what is most democratic, or you risk losing your legitimacy to govern. So I ask you to think about the words of Senator Paul Wellstone. We all do better when we all do better. The AFL-CIO stands ready to mobilize based on the decisions this county board makes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Heenan, are you speaking for the record on behalf of the AFL-CIO?
The Central Labor Council, yes.
Central Labor Council, thank you. Next, we have Mr. Patrick Cortese.
Good evening. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak before you here tonight. My name is Patrick Cortese. I live in District 3 in southwestern McLean County, just up the road from Member Went, actually. I'm here tonight to speak about the upcoming redrawing of our county board districts. I'm here to suggest a map-making process that is transparent and to advocate for either maintaining the current number of districts and members or possibly increasing the number of districts to 20. State Senator Jason Barrickman of Bloomington said recently in an interview with WGLT, ultimately, where those district lines lie are either going to be drawn by politicians, as they've done in the past, where they're drawing the maps and picking their voters, or it's going to be drawn through an independent commission that uses key principles in drawing independent maps. Things like making sure those districts are compact and contiguous, that racial minorities are appropriately considered and represented, and that communities of interest remain together. If the lawmakers draw the maps, we know they're going to prioritize the location of their incumbents. If the citizens of the state are prioritized, we're going to have maps that adequately represent them. Senator Barrickman is absolutely correct, not just for those state maps, but for ours here in McLean County as well. The map should be drawn by or with input from an independent commission and not by politicians. The process should be transparent, with potential maps shared with the public before they are voted on, to give the citizens of McLean County an opportunity to view and to comment on those proposed plans. Currently, this board does accurately reflect the community in terms of various demographics, such as sex and political affiliation. However, it does not properly represent the community in terms of race and ethnic background. The recent data shows that our population is nearly 80% white, 8% Black or African American, 5% Asian, 5% Hispanic, and 2% multiracial. 20% of McLean County is non-white. There's one member on this county board that is a person of color. Having few districts will not improve that situation and will, in fact, make it more difficult for those communities to have adequate representation. Our largest industries in terms of employment here in McLean County are in the finance and insurance sector, educational services, and healthcare and social assistance. They combine for nearly 44% of the people employed in this county. The top 15 employers all reside within the Bloomington normal city limits. They account, through commercial property taxes, 27% of all the taxes collected by McLean County government. The only one more than that are the taxes that are collected from residential property taxes at 63%. Farm taxes account for just 10%. These employers and their employees deserve proper and fair representation in their county government. Moving to larger districts would not enhance the relationship between a resident and their elected representative. It would in fact dilute it. Each of the proposed 5 districts would potentially be very large and serve a very diverse population. It would be extremely difficult for a board member to be adequately in touch with their residents, to be familiar with the infrastructure, and to understand the various needs and issues of those residents in those districts. Larger districts will not be compact and certainly unable to fulfill the requirement to keep communities of interest together. Keeping the current system or even increasing the number of districts would maintain or increase accountability of representatives to the residents and ensure an appropriate amount of oversight for county services and expenditures of tax dollars. Whatever this committee decides going forward, I ask that the plans and maps are made easily accessible to all the residents before any decisions are made, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cortese. Next, we have County Board Member and Committee Member Lori Woolrab. I believe you are speaking as a committee member. Is that correct? Or as
Mr.
public
Chair,
speaker?
with your leave, I'd like to reserve my time till the end. We have so many speakers, and I think I'd like to hear from those before I speak.
Is there an objection? Well, then your request will be granted. We'll
Thank
put you
you.
down number 31. Thank you. Okay, next on our list would be a call-in from Ms. Rachel Heil-Broad. Ms. Heil-Broad, are you on the phone with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you may proceed. You have 5 minutes.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Just wanted to start by thanking the board for the opportunity to speak. I also wanted to specifically shout out my representative, Ms. Johnston, who has gone out of her way and truly bent over backwards to make this issue accessible to her constituents here in District 5, to engage us in the process, and to underline the importance of this issue. So shout to Lizzie. She does the absolute best job. So I just wanted to acknowledge that sort of to this point, I have heard that much of the discussion is framed by a couple of primary concerns. The first of that being that the needs of specific communities with distinct interests, specifically rural communities in the county, will not be met by whatever redistricting goes on, or that their voices might be watered down. And the second concern is that accountability for elected officials might decrease. I think that both of these are very legitimate concerns. I think they should be taken very seriously. And the catch is, both concerns have been cited in support of fewer districts, when actually both would recommend more districts, at least 10 and potentially 20 districts, as we move forward as a community. So to articulate that a little further, it's pretty clear that a greater number of smaller districts means more direct representation for everyone in the county. That's urban, that's rural, that's white, that's non-white, that's educated at any degree, that's men, women, children, the whole community. As many of you probably already know, we've been throwing around this statistic because we're very proud of it. McLean County is one of 6 counties in Illinois currently gaining population, while the rest of the state is losing population. And this is really good news. Our communities are more diverse, our tax base is growing, and with these positive changes comes a need for representation which is sensitive to the interests of neighborhoods in a way that would be impossible with 5 or definitely 3 districts. In my read of this, very large districts like this would be the number one issue that would cause the watering down of constituent voices in a way that we have heard concerns pretty much every person who's offered comment on this issue so far. And I think that speaks for itself. Like Patrick just said, representatives living close to their constituents are by definition more accessible to those constituents, and they have much more data to work from to advocate for the needs of their neighbors. So simply put, more districts is more direct input from constituents. That to me is hard to argue with, but I wanted to just acknowledge, given the number of comments that have been made so far and that are on the docket this evening, and also the tone of some of those comments, I want to acknowledge and that I understand the impulse potentially on the part of county board members to sort of just double down on their positions. It's a bit of a whirlwind, and I wanted to, as I say, acknowledge that challenge and offer you an opportunity to do the opposite. I really, truly hope that you're listening carefully to these concerns. They come from a place of absolute goodwill and to really be enthused about the degree of public engagement that we're finding with this issue. I appreciate it. I appreciate each person who's spoken. I appreciate the elected officials who are taking this evidence that's put before you into consideration as you make your decisions and potentially change your positions if that's what the data calls for. So thanks very much for the opportunity. That's all.
Thank you. Next will be a county board member, Ms. Leah Klein, who's calling in. Member Klein, can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you may proceed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman McIntyre and members of the Executive Committee. Today, tens of thousands of residents of McLean County went to their mailboxes and found that their annual McLean County property tax bill had arrived. About 77% of those people who will pay those taxes with only a little grumbling, live in the Metro Bloomington Normal area. These residents depend on the services of McLean County government that they overwhelmingly fund, from the health department to the county clerk and animal control. Their taxes also fund the few departments that are largely in place to support rural residents, like the highway department and zoning department. This resource sharing is part of our shared enterprise as a community, and you would be hard-pressed to find times when representatives of the urban districts have opposed services for rural residents. As a member of the Transportation and Land Use Committees, I know firsthand that the needs of the county are understood as needs of the county, not of my or your district. We do not parse which resident pays for what. We seek to support the community in its broadest possible definition. As a member, I represent District 8, a district that encompasses both white and blue-collar communities, historic neighborhoods, and the businesses in downtown Bloomington. During my year on the county board, I have assisted my constituents with accessing county COVID relief subsidies for their small businesses, connected them with state unemployment benefits, and signed up countless folks, young and old, for vaccine appointments with the health department. While I was voting for hundreds of thousands of dollars of new road work in the county, I was also focusing on the particular needs of my community as we weathered the most unusual of storms. As many people have said before, I do believe that the rural residents of the county need to be adequately represented by members who understand their particular needs, just as the urban districts do. Despite the fact that I am a city dweller and assumed to be clueless about the life in rural parts of our county, I do actually come from a long line of farmers and ranchers in Arkansas and Texas. As my father likes to joke, the longhorns on my parents' cattle ranch are my siblings because they get as much, if not more, of his attention than I do. Please do not assume that because I live in an urban neighborhood that I cannot understand, that I disregard, or that I do not care about rural residents. Still, I understand the desire to know that your representative experiences day in and day out what you experience, that they drive over the same potholes and send their kids to the same schools. It is for this reason that I support the plan to increase the districts to 20. While reducing the number of districts to 5 might give you the chance to have more representatives who reside in the same part of the county as you do, it does not guarantee it. Drawing tighter districts means that the representative for that district will necessarily live nearby. It will make the great landmass that we inhabit in McLean County more manageable and bring residents closer to their representatives on the county board. Whether you choose to believe me or not in this hyper-partisan context, my greatest interest in this discussion is that we come out with a redistricting plan that accurately represents the citizens of McLean County. I have sincere concerns that we take into account minority communities and communities of interest who, though they make up approximately 20% of the population, or just less than the rural communities who represent 23% of the county's population, currently have only one seat at the table, while our rural communities currently have 30% representation or 6 seats. There are state and federal laws to consider in this regard, both when it comes to packing districts and limiting minority representation. But I hope we will not make space for minority communities because we have to, but because we know it is the right thing to do. Our board should look like us, the members should live near us, and understand our perspectives and concerns. I believe smaller districts will make all of that more possible. And finally, in a point of personal privilege, I would like to appeal to my colleagues about the tone of these hearings. I have been genuinely disappointed at the personal attacks that I have seen launched from public comment. Differences of opinion are to be expected in these situations, and I am certainly not innocent of becoming passionate about issues affecting me and my constituents. But to launch ad hominem attacks against members who are doing their job is something that we should all oppose. As members, we were asked to bring our opinions to you and to make proposals as we entered into this deliberative process. This is exactly what I and my colleagues have done. And if you do not like the ideas, attack the ideas, not the person. In the end, we all have to live together and want what is best for all of us. I amplify the voices of those who are asking for more opportunities to see the plans that the majority party has for county districts and to be allowed to comment and discuss real proposals, not abstract ideas. I thank you, my colleagues, and members of the public for your time.
Thank you, Member Klein. Next will be Mr. Spencer Johansson, who is a call-in. Mr. Johansson, can you hear us?
Yeah, good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, you may proceed.
I'm Spencer Johansson. I'm the mayor of the city of Lexington. I'd like to first thank you for the opportunity to address the committee tonight, and I apologize for not being there in person. One thing I think we've all learned from these hearings is that many citizens are concerned with the number of districts and the fact that the majority of the votes that affect the entire county come from inside Bloomington Normal. Some excellent recommendations have been made to this committee, and I trust you will take those into consideration before making your recommendation. However, I do share some concern as far as the number of districts and the lack of representation in the rural areas. I believe the simplest solution is not to increase the number of board members, but simply reduce the districts to 5. Each district will have 4 board members representing them. By making these changes, it would increase the representation for all the residents. I do not agree with the prospect at large voting. I feel the citizens want and need their representative to live in that district. On that note, I think the board members need to be reminded it's okay to reach outside your district or for feedback when an important decision is about to be made. As elected officials, it's our responsibility to contact the citizens from time to time and, more importantly, listen to what they have to say. Having said that, this is a two-sided street. We as citizens need to be more involved and interact more with the county board. I know a lot of the smaller communities outside Bloomington Normal have their own form of government, and sometimes we just focus on those issues. We need to start paying more attention. Now, I've heard some talk concerning party affiliation. Please don't let us put politics before the needs of the people. This country has suffered enough because of that very reason. We as elected officials work for all the citizens. The bottom line is this: the decisions the McLean County Board make affect us all, and the best way to stay informed is for us to stay involved. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have current county board member, Ms. Elizabeth Johnson, and she's here in person.
Thank you for this opportunity to again address you about redistricting. My previous comments on the 20th, they were brief and very general in nature. But tonight, I want to clarify some of the reasoning behind my suggestions. And I want to start with the Illinois statutes. They do specify that county board members be elected by districts that are equal in population. Districts should be comprised of contiguous territory and be as compact as practicable, and that townships and municipalities should be divided only when necessary to keep districts equal in population. These criteria reflect in principle a goal of redistricting to maintain and, if possible, strengthen the connection between board members and their districts. Constructing districts that break up communities distorts the voice of the voters and dilutes the principle of representation. From my discussion with the Farm Bureau representatives and from some of the comments that I've heard, I understand that many of those advocating for a reduced district plan believe that doing so would preserve and even increase the rural voice on the board. It is a clear indication that they believe that Bloomington Normal residents should have less voice and should not have as much say in how their own tax dollars are spent. For residents in incorporated areas, a more localized form of government from the city and town does not exclude us from the needs of county services. Moreover, any resident who lives in an incorporated area can testify that we pay county taxes as well as municipal. We are major contributors to the funding of McLean County and are entitled to a proportionate say in how our tax dollars are used to serve the public. Some have argued that county services are less important to those living in Bloomington Normal. However, the county government provides services that greatly impact all residents. And there is no evidence that the board has neglected or intends to neglect the departments most cited as community safety, county highways, or zoning needs in the rural areas. We have consistently supported these departments and projects brought forth because we know that McLean County's rural communities are an integral part of who we are. Our production of corn and soy is a staggering amount and is a point of pride for our county. As much as I do value the contributions of our agricultural industry and respect the Farm Bureau's advocacy for its industry and constituency, I believe that these contributions are I see them as part of the whole picture of McLean County. The $1.5 billion that they talk about so often is part of the $13.7 billion gross metropolitan product for Bloomington. The fundamental problem that I see with reducing the number of districts is it would require carving out sections of the Twin Cities and merging them with unincorporated areas in order to adhere to the equal population stipulation. This has massive potential for consequences that could undercut our relationships with the largest municipal governments and the services that county residents within Bloomington Normal more heavily depend on. Conversely, increasing the districts will allow for a closer or more representative relationship between residents and the district board member. The whole reason that county governments exist is to create smaller districts within our state to allow for local voices to determine how to address local issues. And I am proposing the same principle by suggesting 20 districts. And while I do wholeheartedly support this principle, I recognize the limitations we face without our census data, and I'm aware of the potential ramifications for drawing lines without accurate population numbers. In which case, I do support maintaining our current setup of 10 districts and 20 members until the latest information is available. As it stands, the 2011 maps have produced the most diverse board in the county's history with equal male-female representation, 2 representatives elected as college students, a partisan split that does mirror the consistent voter turnout, and our first Asian American board member. While creating smaller districts would give opportunities for an even greater diversity, holding the current district setup would prove far superior than an effort to dilute these voices. We must remember that apportionment is to be based on population, not industry or tax-based contribution. What is right and what is proper is that our districts should reflect our community. And my comments, I believe, second the very first public comment that this process should be free of any special interest influence and that map lines should be drawn to reflect the community that we live in. And if the population numbers indicated that the rural districts were underrepresented, I would be standing here tonight supporting that proposal to expand their voice, but the numbers do not. I offer my thoughts openly as part of this conversation, and I've never once issued demands, insulted anyone, or sought to suppress public participation. My purpose in serving as an elected official has been to ensure transparency and promote both participation and representation in McLean County governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. A.J. Biancalana, and hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Do we have a response from him? Ms. Morlock has said he sent an email. Was that? Or-
Sir, I did hear from him. It was later in the day and I sent him a call-in information. I didn't note the time that I sent the email, but it was after Health Committee.
Mhm. So we have not heard back from him at this time?
I have not as of yet, no.
Okay, well, maybe I'll try to call on him later in case he tunes in, since we have so many people on our video screen, make sure that he has an opportunity. Next will be Mr. Gavin Cunningham. Is Mr. Cunningham available? Gavin Cunningham. Okay, I'll go on to Mr. John Walter. John Walter, yeah, are you on, Mr. Walter?
I am. Let's see, can you hear me?
Yes, we do, and you may proceed.
All right. My name is John Walter. I live in the 7th District of McLean County, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to come talk to you. I want to talk to you primarily about multiple member districts. Multiple member districts help encourage public accountability and civic participation, primarily because I get to vote for one of you every 2 years as opposed to every 4 years. And while I may not, or reporters may not keep an eye on what you're doing, the person who wants your job is very likely to do that. So we get a great deal of participation that way. Also, by staggering the members in the district, you have older, more experienced members helping younger members, and younger members helping to open the eyes of older members to new ideas. Now, every 10 years, you all are up for election, and I get a chance not to have to choose between experience and new, because I get to vote for two. And it's easier for a challenger to come in because they only have to defeat one of you. Now, getting good candidates can be a problem, particularly if your district's too small. I know I tried very hard to try to get members to run for the 7th district, particularly candidates that were not interested in political power or patronage. I think I was so desperate, I actually ended up running. Now, the 7th district is all inside the city of Bloomington. And it was difficult to explain to some voters that as a member of the county board, I had nothing to do with city lights, city parks, or city services, but that I dealt with town items on the board. Now, because I was running, I actually ended up getting more votes than Dr. Gordon did because my district was competitive. If you have competitive districts by having more candidates, you tend to get more participation. Now, it would be nice to be able to have this more often than once every 10 years. So if you want to add more members to my district, that would probably be helpful in doing that. Also, that would tend to give groups that are underrepresented in my district a chance to run, because you don't necessarily need to have a clear 50 plus 1% of the vote. You just have to have enough to win one of the additional seats. Now, I know there are some I've heard on the board that are concerned that you might be mixing rural people with city people if you draw the districts. Well, I'm from Indiana, and over in Marion County, Indiana, that's where Indianapolis is, back in the 70s, they created a thing called UNIGOV. That is to say that city voters and suburban voters and rural voters have to work together. And you may have noticed Indianapolis has grown tremendously since the 70s. I wish to keep the county board responsible to the people. I think the idea of making very small districts is a bit of a problem because it's hard, like I said, hard to get voters from that. And I think the board needs to work on keeping the good services that they have performed, because we have city people working with county people. I know the chairman of the local Democrats was concerned that there might be rural people in some of these districts, but I think by keeping the members of the board on their toes by having more elections and more competitors, by having more members in the districts. I'm not afraid of my neighbors to the north, south, east, or west of me, just because they may have a different perspective than I do on things, which seems to be one of the concerns that the people that have for the last 40 years divided Bloomington and Normal for political purposes. I ask your attention to keeping up the good work that you do and keeping the services available. But thank you much.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have County Board Member Ms. Val Lehman, who's calling in. County Board Member Lehman, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Greetings and good evening, honorable members of the McLean County Board Executive Committee. First, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak this evening as a McLean County resident and as a member of the board. Over the past 2 public comment sessions, we've heard multiple options for ways to go through and to apportion the representation of our county. It's been suggested that the board and its structure as it exists today might not have the best interest of the rural population in mind, simply because there aren't more members on the board who live in rural areas. Would we not want to ensure that each very unique community has more direct access to the representatives that actually live in their neighborhood and can understand and can speak to the very unique needs of each community while representing them on the board? I'd like to encourage all members of the executive committee to consider that your role as a leader is to act with the best interest of our company or our county as a whole. We know that the future solution to apportionment must be compact, must be contiguous, and it must be of equal representation. I'd also like to make sure that within the conversations, we also consider that according to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, if a community is able to draw a majority-minority district, that they should do so to make sure that we allow for that direct representation of the minority community. We don't currently appear to necessarily have a majority-minority district as we stand with our 10 districts with the way that the lines are currently drawn. If we move to a system that contains even fewer districts, this actually further waters down the voice of our minority communities. While having more people represent you might seem immediately attractive, it's worthwhile to note that fewer districts with more representatives per district would potentially increase that geographic area that representatives will be responsible for, making it difficult ultimately to truly understand the needs of each community that they represent. It would not necessarily guarantee that any single representative lives in your direct neighborhood, in your town, in your village, in what you identify as your community. It would potentially dilute the diversity of perspective and lived experience that are represented. And it would potentially continue to disenfranchise the electorate who already feels marginalized by underrepresentation in their county government. I believe that the county board should be representative of the community that we live in, the McLean County as a whole. While reviewing the county's breakdown, the rural population makes up for 23% of the county. The representation for the rural community on the county board is 30%. Our county's minority population makes up roughly 20% of McLean County. Yet our county board only has 1 minority member, making up 5% of the board. Would we not want to research and to select the apportionment solution that allows and encourages minority board member representation to be increased, if not directly in line with the population percentage itself? So as you consider apportionment solutions to make up the county board, I ask that you please keep in mind the minority communities that are far too often underrepresented in our county government. Yet they pay taxes and rely on services the same as other community interest groups. Please consider the option that's going to allow for more neighborhood districts, which in turn allow for more diverse perspectives to be directly represented. Or I ask that you please consider retaining the 10 district representation that we currently have with more appropriately drawn boundaries that represent our communities as they actually are. Thank you so much for your time and the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Kara McMorris in person. Please come to the podium. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me this evening. My name is Kara McMorris. I'm a resident of McLean County in Normal. Over 20 years ago, I moved here to go to Illinois State University. And why I chose this area, this part of the state, was because although it is diverse and we have a great population, there is still a small town feel here. Very much throughout McLean County, we're not only surrounded by small towns, but the Bloomington area has that feel where we know our neighbors and we can lend a hand when we know our neighbors' needs. We can meet the needs of those around us in that way. And when more voices are heard, there are more people lending a hand, there are more people speaking up for their neighbors. And I serve in many capacities now in this area. I serve as a court-appointed special advocate for children who are in the foster care system. I am a pastor, I am a teacher, and my husband also is a public school teacher. So I am in the mix with the people of our community, and I've heard so many say that they're worried about the percentage of the vote going down, those especially in rural communities, though those same people from rural communities have shared how different their life is from those in the center of Bloomington Normal. This is a diverse community, and whether we are rural or urban, we all want our voices to be heard. We all expect that our voices would be heard, for that's the government that we have, the representation that we have. The ones who are saying they want their voices heard the most are unfortunately the ones whose voices are already heard loud and clear. They are already represented, they already have the resources and the know-how to get their voices heard. So I am speaking on behalf of those who I am constantly every day of my life trying to amplify the voices of, those who are non-white and those who are in lower socioeconomic statuses, who do not have the ability, who do not have the opportunity to come and speak out for themselves, partially because there's not as much transparency as we would like. There is not as much knowledge in the community of what happens at these meetings and how it impacts their day-to-day lives. I have listened to these meetings, I have listened to the concerns, and I understand fully that my representative cannot know me if my representative, or my struggles, if they live in a completely different part of town, a completely different area. And I have walked these districts in the last few years, and as I have walked these districts, I have noticed how it is hard in one district to find in two very separate areas anything that the residents in those districts have in common. The way that the districts are drawn is very important, and it does impact representation. It does impact the voices that are heard. And we currently, if we go to fewer districts, it will absolutely dilute the voices of those whose voices already are lacking representation. Those voices that we need to continue to amplify because for centuries they have not been heard are even more and more being oppressed. By continuing to amplify these voices, we can actually give help. We can be that small town community who cares for all of those who live near us and around us, and we can lend the hand because we can hear their struggles. We can hear what it is that they need from us as their representatives. And when we don't, it's not that those needs go away, but what we end up doing is overburdening our nonprofits, overburdening our churches, because those needs remain. And we hear them in the nonprofit sector. We hear them in the churches. And so I'm coming to you as a leader in this community who advocates for these people, that as their representatives, you would be certain that their voices are heard, because it is in the best interest of your entire community. Those same nonprofits that you support, those same nonprofits that are fighting for our people, we come to you and say, don't put that all on us, but let these voices be heard so that as a community, we can lift up those who need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is,
Point of order, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
yes, sir.
Would the chair please direct Member Wint to please keep comments and grunts and other emotions to himself while the speakers are up there speaking?
Yes, of course. Let's all show proper decorum here as we go through this procedure. And thank you very much. We're going now to Mr. Dave Bentland. Mr. Bentland, are you on the screen? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
You may proceed. We can hear
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you this evening, and thank you for your service to the county board. I do not have prepared remarks. I found out about this issue relatively late, but I am on this call as a representative of the Prairie Pride Coalition, one of a number of minority groups in the Bloomington Normal area. And I am calling and speaking to express our concern over the proposed plan to reduce the number of board districts to 5. We feel that this would greatly dilute the diversity that has grown in our community over the past years. I came to this community in 1980, and I've lived in Bloomington Normal ever since then. When I came here in 1980, it was a much less diverse place. And over the 41 years that I've been here, I've seen a rich diversity come into our community, come into our county. And I feel that a dilution of that diversity is not good for the overall county. We have populations here that have specific needs, and a reduction in the number of districts would result in a lesser in not hearing their voices as loudly as we would. I would support a move to increase the number of districts into smaller districts so that we have more direct representation and that we can have a county board that represents the rich diversity of our county. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to ask if Mr. AJ Biancalana has called in, or Mr. Gavin Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham? If not, at this time, I'm going to recess this meeting. We'll be back at 8:05 in 12 minutes. Thank you.
We're all called
Caller, could you identify yourself? We didn't get your name originally.
my name's Amanda Anders.
Okay, thank you.
Avery. Okay, let's reconvene, call this meeting back in order. And so at this time, I'd like to call on Ms. Avery Soringer. As
Yeah,
a
hello.
call-in.
I'm here.
I'm sorry if I
Can you hear me?
didn't pronounce your name correctly. We can hear you and you have the floor. Member Went, we're ready to start here.
Hi, hello, County Board members. My name is Avery Springer, and I'm a sophomore here at Illinois State University, speaking on behalf of us here in County Board District 6. In my time here, I've gotten super active in local politics and helping get passionate people elected, like my friend Hannah Beer. And when I heard that the redistricting committee was considering splitting up our district to disperse the student voice, I was very disappointed. Students are what make this community vibrant, and our representation is imperative to a true representative democracy. While some argue that students are only here for 4 years, I think we can agree that this is not true. Former students choose to settle here, and even though the students may cycle out, they will always be here. I wanted to go on record saying that I would not support this attempt to disenfranchise students when they are such an integral part of this community, politically and as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Mr. Matt Dratt. Matthew Dratt, are you on board with us? Can you hear?
I am.
Well, we
you
can
hear
hear
me?
you, so you have the floor and you may
Hi there.
proceed.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate this. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. As mentioned, my name is Matt Dratt, and I reside in Hudson, McLean County Board District 1. Tonight, you've heard many articulate speakers, and I thank you for the opportunity to be one of the voices in this evening's meeting. I come before you to voice a concern about the proposed redistricting plan and process. Having spent more than 40 years in this county, I first arrived here from Chicago in 1978 to attend school at Illinois Wesleyan University. I only share this fact because I intentionally chose to stay here and raise my family because of what this community meant to its citizens. It was a community that accepted diverse perspectives as part of its DNA and culture. The balance of urban and rural points of view was celebrated. In fact, we understand that even within the urban and rural communities themselves, people do not look at the world around them in the same way. It is from my perspective as a resident of rural McLean County that I want to share some thoughts. The rural communities of McLean County are far more diverse in our views than we take into consideration. The crops we plant are not identical from field to field, nor is the way we view agriculture. Our opinions about roads, taxes, land use, and frankly, everything else are different. And yet I wonder why the members of the Board Executive Committee, especially those of you who represent rural districts, think that we are all the same. I can only guess this is what drives you not to increase representation, but to in fact decrease it. The reality of contracting the number of county board seats will only serve to create greater challenges to our board representatives. This action will make it even more difficult for our representatives to spend time in the rural towns of our community. Friends, this is plainly about time and geography. Changing the number of representatives into some mega district will not make it easier to represent those citizens. And again, I ask, are we assuming that those of us living in Hudson, for example, look at every issue coming before the county board in exactly the same way as our neighbors in Towanda or Carlock or Danvers or Stanford or McLean or Hayworth or Bellflower or Colfax or Lexington?
We don't even look at things in the same way in our one community of Hudson. 40 years ago, when I chose to build my life in this community, it was because at the end of the day, I saw a place that inherently believed in the voice of all of its citizens. That is why we have our current number of county board representatives, and why decisions such as redistricting must be given the widest possible outlet for opinions to be shared and decisions to be made. And while we are truly grateful to all the members of the executive committee and everything that you have done in this process, if we really want to have the voice of all of our rural citizens to be heard in this matter, it must be brought before the full county board for consideration. Despite our differing politics, that is the type of fairness that we have come to expect in McLean County. Growing up in Chicago, I saw backroom politics at its finest. Deals made not in the light of day, but in dark, smoke-filled rooms. That, friends, is not an analogy. That's a reality. And while some of us will say that redistricting is always political, why do we in McLean County need to carry on that tradition? Why do we need to silence the voices of our neighbors? Is that who we really are? I ask that the entire county redistricting process be brought to the full county board for deliberation, and I call for the board to reject the contraction of the number of board districts. That is the way all citizens in the county can know that what they think matters. Thank you for the time to speak to you this evening. My hope is that you will thoughtfully consider what I have shared. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Dratt. Next, we have in person Mr. Steve Cease. Mr. Cease, you have the podium.
Hello, my name is Steve Cease. I am currently a resident of County Board District 8 on the west side of Bloomington. I'm also here as the chairman of the Libertarian Party of Illinois. Libertarian. I have no dog in the fight over a board that is only comprised of Republicans and Democrats. The entire county. I also stand with rural voters tonight who don't want to subsidize programs, such as a recycling program, for example, that disproportionately serve the Bloomington Normal community. Such programs should be instituted at the municipal level if that's what those two communities wish to accomplish. Rural voters should not pay for services they cannot conveniently use and are disproportionately used by folks in Bloomington and Normal. For those very reasons, I came to speak today to ask both the committee and those who are advocates of a 5-district model to reconsider this plan and instead either maintain our current 10-district with two representatives each model, or even better, move to a 20-district model with 1 representative each. Both geographically and geometrically, there is no way to divide McLean County into 5 contiguous districts of equal population without creating some sort of pie-shaped map where all 5 districts or 4 of the 5 districts contain both parts of Bloomington Normal and areas of rural McLean County. It's true that this does have the possibility to lead toward more rural representation on the board, but there's no guarantee of that. In fact, in such a model, ask yourselves this question: which is more likely to happen in those 5 districts, that all 4 representatives end up being from rural McLean County, or all 4 of those representatives end up being from Bloomington Normal. If you live in rural McLean County, the people supporting this 5-district plan, there's a high likelihood in a 5-district model that rural constituents would be left out with representation on the board. And I find it incredibly ironic that I have many personal friends supporting the 5-district model who are some of the most vocal critics when Democrats in Springfield gerrymander our congressional and legislative districts. While those criticisms of Democrats who run the state of Illinois is very legitimate, they seem to have no problem when their own party does it at a county level. The reason the 5-district model is being proposed is because Republicans in McLean County think they can use such a model to push Democrats out of the board by combining areas of politically diverse Bloomington Normal with traditionally Republican rural McLean County. And that plan could possibly work. We've seen Republicans lose board seats by extremely thin margins in the last 2 cycles. But what happens when that plan backfires? What happens when folks in Stanford and Hayworth are all of a sudden represented by 4 Democrats from Bloomington's southwest side? What happens when folks in Hudson and Lexington are represented by 4 Democrats in North Normal? What happens when all 20 seats on the board are occupied by representatives living in Bloomington Normal and there are no rural representatives on the board any longer? In our current 10-district model, rural voters are guaranteed 4 to 6 spots on the county board. In a 20-district model, it would be the same range and possibly even up to 7, depending on how the maps are drawn. In a 5-district model, rural voters are not guaranteed any representation on the McLean County Board. While there's a small chance it could work out in favor for rural voters, it's much more likely that it will backfire. The only way to guarantee rural voters continue to have a voice on this board is to keep the number of districts the same or expand the number of districts to 20. I've heard the 20-district plan criticized as voter suppression because each voter would only be electing 5% of the board instead of 10, like in the current model.
Time.
Time. I'm so sorry.
That's all right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cease. Next we have Ms. Kimberly Miller in person. Ms. Miller, you can have take the podium, please. Thank you. You may proceed.
Okay, thank you for letting me just make a couple comments. I'm just a resident of McLean County, and just in hearing all this, I had a couple comments or a couple of questions. Another lady that talked, we moved here about 4 years ago. My family moved here about 4 years ago, and we moved here from another agricultural county close to here, but the population's a lot lower there. And one of our neighbors said, "Oh, you're going to love it because they do have a small town feel." And we have found that. Just everybody's connected, even though it is a large area, people are very connected. And so we found that same thing too. But I read a letter that Mr. Cortese wrote to about how that was one thing I found very confusing when we moved here. Like, I would be talking to somebody and they're like, "Oh no, my state representative is somebody different." And I was like, "Oh, that's so confusing." And Mr. Cortese wrote a letter asking that it not be split where we don't have different state representatives, senators, and congressmen and all. But I thought, well, how confusing would it be to have 20 different districts and then try to figure out what district you're in? So I felt like 20 districts is a lot of districts. And I did notice the last meeting I watched, the committee meeting, there were 2 board members that couldn't be present. And I know things happen. People get sick. There's emergencies and things like that. But if you go to a 20-person, 20-district model, and my person's not there, I have no representation. So I feel like, where it is now 2 per district, or it could be, if you go to 5 districts, then I could be voting on up to 4 people per district. And I just feel like that gives me better chance. And honestly, Mr. Cortese also wrote in the letter that the state representative lived a distance away, and he does live it. My state representative does live a distance away, but I've been able to visit him. I've been able to call him. I've been able to email him. I don't have trouble contacting him, so I don't feel like it's going to be an issue if you have 4 people. And I feel like the maps can be drawn fair to for everybody in the county. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Brenda Baker, who is calling in. Ms. Baker, are you with us? Brenda Baker? Okay, we will move on down to Mr. David Flesh. Mr. Flesh, are you with us?
Yes, Chairman, I'm with you.
Thank you. We can hear you and you may proceed.
Thank you. I appreciate you putting me on the schedule tonight. So I'm just a resident of McLean County and I live in the town of Normal. So I'm just going to make a few comments here. I think that with this redistricting issue, we should just change the number of districts from 10 to 5, and the number of representatives from 2 to 4. I think that sounds like a good idea. It makes sense instead of spreading out into 20 districts with 1 representative running. I know that Normal has these has the same kind of concept, and so do other counties in the state of Illinois. I think this makes more sense by going with 5 districts and 4 representatives. My vote will account for 20% of the board instead of the other plan have given me only 5%. Even the Democratic chair agreed that expanding the number of districts while also advocating for consolidation at the state level, and that's fair criticism. I just ask that Chairman, you and the other members of the county board please support a map with 5 districts and 4 representatives per district. And that's really my point tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Becky Hines calling in. Ms. Hines, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Thank you.
We can hear you and you may proceed.
Okay, well, thank you, Chairman McIntyre. I'm Becky Hines. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of McLean County. And first, I want to thank the County Board Executive Committee for the opportunity to speak today. I also want to thank the citizens that have come forward during these last 3 meetings to present their meaningful thoughts, concerns, and comments. The League is a nonpartisan political organization focused on empowering voters and defending democracy through voter education, issue education, and citizen participation. It is in that spirit we come here today because we want this effort to succeed and to ensure that there is a process, timelines, and opportunities for citizen engagement. Fair representation is a fundamental principle of our democracy. Since redistricting only happens every 10 years, it is incumbent upon our elected officials to use an open and transparent system. The League supports fair redistricting processes at the national, state, and local level that values fairness and transparency in the process, leading to the elimination of partisan and racial gerrymandering and ensures people have the opportunity to participate. Gives people direct influence over drawing of districts in their communities, resulting in voters choosing their representatives instead of representatives choosing their voters. The League promotes unbiased and accountable redistricting practices. These must include citizen participation and access at all levels and steps of the process. While the League feels the opportunity for comment at the McLean County Executive Committee is a first step, from League observations, this current effort falls short of our expectations. The League understands that the timeline to redistricting completion is short, unless it's extended by the state. And we also understand there are challenges posed by the delay in census information. Factoring in these looming deadlines, the League advocates there is an opportunity to add transparency and organization to the process and encourages the county board to consider adjusting the course of action during May and June and beyond should the deadline be extended to include the following. 1, establish and publish decision-making criteria for both the number of districts and the number of board representation and the maps. 2, form a diverse, nonpartisan advisory committee to review the process and proposals in order to provide input to the county board. 3, build in public meetings for citizens to comment on actual proposed options. And 4, structure communication plan to keep citizens informed that includes both traditional media channels and virtual channels, including dedicated web page that is linked to the county media board homepage with redistricting timelines and information, as well as social media posts. While many of the speakers at these public comment meetings have provided recommendations and reasoning on the structure of the county board, the League wants to ensure a written, established process and timeline are in place, and that the process is fair, transparent, and assures all of citizens that their voices matter and their votes count. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Ms. Maureen Barnes. I see Maureen's initials up on the screen. Ms. Barnes, can you hear
Yes.
us?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
You may proceed.
Okay, I'll be very, very brief, which I'm sure will be appreciated at this point in the evening. Right now, with 10 districts and 2 votes per district, that means that each voter is represented by 10%. If we have the number of districts to 5 and increase the number of members to 4, each voter is represented by 20% of the board. So therefore, I'm in favor of reducing the number of districts and increasing the number of members. And I thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Anna Ziegler in person. Ms. Ziegler, you may come up to the podium. You may proceed.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity once again to address you as the members of the Executive Committee on this reapportionment issue. My name is Anna Ziegler. I represent the McLean County Farm Bureau, which is a voluntary member organization representing farmers and farmland owners. I'd first like to clear up some confusion. Our interest in discussing and debating these issues is talking about the merit of these options and not attacking any particular person or group. I've been pleased by the comments this evening that have not gone into personal attacks and was disappointed to see some of that at previous hearings. In researching the issue during these last 2 weeks after the idea of single-member districts was introduced at the first public hearing, we believe that a county-wide referendum would be required for the McLean County Board to go to 20 districts. This is based on consultation with the attorneys on staff at Illinois Farm Bureau, as well as conversations with the McLean County State's Attorney's Office. The Illinois Constitution, Article 7, Section 3B, states that no county other than Cook County may change its method of electing board members except as approved by county-wide referendum. So what does the word method in the state constitution mean? The courts have interpreted that word method to include the 3 options listed in the state statute, which are single-member districts, at-large, or multi-member districts. McLean County currently has multi-member districts, so therefore a county-wide referendum would be required in order to go to either single-member districts or to go to at-large. Our understanding is that the McLean County Board currently has the authority to, number 1, set the number of board members between 5 and 29, as spelled out in state statute, and to set the number of multi-member districts, but that it has to remain multi-member districts. Mathematically, based on 5 to 29 members, that means that you would be creating between 2 and 14 districts. So all that being said, I would like also to take the opportunity to reiterate our position, as it's been a little bit misrepresented or misstated publicly by some others.
We do not have a specific plan for a specific number of districts. We have a position that's asking for a restructure to 4 to 7 districts. Our principal interest is in strong rural and ag representation, but we have Farm Bureau members that live in every part of the county, including all of the 10 current county board districts. There are farmers and farmland owners that live inside the city limits, not just in our small communities and rural areas. As an organization, our board and committee members have been discussing this county board reapportionment issue for several months. It's a matter of significant interest to our members. We've researched and weighed the pros and cons of various options. We recognize and appreciate that McLean County Board represents all the residents of the county, all the taxpayers of the county, and provides a wide range of services, not just to the rural areas. My comments at our first hearing were just to emphasize the areas that are of significant importance to our rural members. McLean County supports maintaining a board size of at least 20 members on the McLean County Board and decreasing the number of county board districts from 4 to 7. We believe this empowers each voter, both urban and rural, to vote for a larger percentage of the board. Instead of every voter voting for just 2 county board members, it could be 3, 4, or 5. We think this increases each district's representation on the county's 7 main committees, and we think that's critically important because most of the work of the county board happens at the committee level. So your current format of 10 districts and 7 members on each committee means each committee lacks representation from 3 to 5 districts. Fewer districts and more members per district means each district and each voter would be more likely to be represented on every committee. We recognize that every choice has trade-offs and that fewer districts means larger geographic areas. We reached the conclusion as an organization that more representatives for each voter and more representatives for each district on every committee offers a greater benefit to all residents of the county. Again, our position is based on the thought that more representatives for each voter and more representative for each district on every committee offers a greater benefit to all residents of the county. We oppose districts that would fragment or split the rural areas and small communities, and we look forward to the opportunity to weigh in on the map drawing process as you proceed, recognizing that the county's in a bit of a predicament with the release of census data unless the state provides you with a legislative remedy. So thank you again for your time this evening, and we appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Next, we have a former county board member. I'd like to welcome back the Honorable Mr. George Gordon. Welcome back, Member Gordon, and you have the podium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your welcome. It is good to stand back in room 400. It's been a while. It's good to see so many familiar faces, at least the upper half of them. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you this evening. The very first thing I want to say is in response to something that Ms. Ziegler just referred to. This was not part of what I regarded as my prepared remarks. I may be wrong. That's been known to happen many times. But if my memory is correct, the last 2 times that the number of county board members was adjusted, in both cases adjusted downward, there wasn't a countywide referendum in either case. I would suggest, I know that legal counsel at the Farm Bureau and apparently in the state's attorney's office has been sought. I would hope that there might be an effort to secure an advisory opinion or at least some guidance from the state attorney general's office on the possibility of moving to single-member districts. That said, and I don't question anything, I'm not questioning Ms. Ziegler's representation of events up to this point. I just want to point out that in my memory at least, there hasn't been a countywide referendum in reducing the size of, reducing the number of members of the McLean County Board. I respectfully recommend to the Executive Committee and to the County Board that for the new board districts you're considering, we maintain the number of board members at its current level of 20, and that the redistricting map be comprised of 20 single-member districts, based, of course, as they must be, on the redistribution of the county's population evident from the 2020 census. I make that recommendation for a number of reasons. I believe, first, that the county should do all it can to maintain and expand the transparency of county government functions. I also believe that greater access for county residents, access to their officials, appointed and elected, is desirable. That representation of diverse groups in the county is equally desirable. And also the inclusion of county citizens and their sense of being included in government decision-making is essential. Single-member districts will make a difference in all of these. They will enhance the visibility of county government as well as resident representation, access, and sense of inclusion. And I believe that the greatest impact will be felt in the smaller community and farm areas of the county, where populations are dispersed over a very wide area. And I don't need to tell anyone sitting here this evening that fact. You're all well aware of it. I would also remind you that both Peoria and Sangamon counties have adopted single-member districts. Thus, there are comparable counties nearby with this board district structure. For all of these reasons, I recommend the creation of 20 single-member districts on the new county map. And again, thank you for your time and your attention and your consideration of the opinions on all sides from all directions that you have entertained over these last 3 hearings. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Member
Chair,
Gordon.
point of order. Would you please request that other members please refrain from making comments and disturbing noises during the public comment period?
Are you specifically referring to anything?
Yes, Mr. Wendt, I can hear his comments over here and they're distracting me from listening to the public comment.
Mr. Wendt, will you please try to not make comments during the meetings? Thank you. Next, we will have Ms. Marcia Albritton. Ms. Albritton, are you on the, can you hear us? Is it call in? Marcia Albritton. Okay, we'll go on to Ms. Jan Hood. Ms. Hood, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman McIntyre and members of the Executive Committee for giving us the opportunity to speak to you tonight about county redistricting. My name is Jan Hood and I'm a member of, I live in District 6. I am here to speak on behalf of Responsible Cities, an organization formed to support local leaders who possess a sense of shared responsibility for bettering the community we all know and love. We believe representation makes a difference and we seek an improved quality of life in McLean County. More than moving left or right, our priority is moving forward and responsibly. Political representation needs to be based on population, not other extraneous factors. The major purpose of the national census is to guide reapportionment according to where people actually live. We believe in maintaining the integrity of the state statutes that county districts are equal in population, compact, contiguous, and protect municipal and township boundaries. We strongly believe that the current model of 10 districts gives equal representation to the citizens of McLean County. As our organization is focused on functional government, we are concerned about consequences on intergovernmental collaboration if there's a shift away from accurate representation. The current district map has resulted in balanced decision-making throughout the communities to everyone's benefit. We don't understand what problem is trying to be solved with radical redistricting, given a district map that has worked well for the past decade. We support equal representation for all citizens. In a democracy, no proposal that dilutes representation of some residents to the benefit of other residents is acceptable. For those reasons, we strongly recommend keeping the current county districts in number of representatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Christopher Thompson on the call in. Mr. Thompson, can you hear us? Christopher Thompson. If not, we'll go to Ms. Amanda Andres? Amanda Andres.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. We can hear you and you may proceed.
All right, excellent, thank you. I strongly oppose the proposals to move to either at-large representation or reapportioning to fewer districts. Either of those proposals would lead to only those with the most money or backed by the largest organizations, standing a chance at being elected to represent large portions of the county instead of a more direct representation, diluting the vote and vote of many like me, or the voice and vote of many like myself in the county. At the end of the day, the county board members represent their constituents, not the lands that they stand on. Any proposal that dilutes that representation into large districts or at-large representation, I am opposed to. I instead would support a proposal that features either the same number of districts that we currently have at 10 and representatives, or a greater number of districts. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Ravi Davuri. Mr. Davuri, I see your initials on the screen. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but you have the floor and you can go ahead and have 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. Hello, my name is Ravi Davuri. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to address you this evening. I am a lifelong resident of Bloomington's East Side here in District 10, and I am calling today to urge the County Board to adopt a fair, bipartisan, and transparent approach to redistricting instead of the highly suspect and partisan approach that has been proposed. Honestly, it is frustrating that this is the third hearing, and none of us callers have any concrete idea what proposals are on the table, and that we, the citizens, are forced to blindly speculate what the intentions of this board are. One thing that I think everyone can and should agree on is that gerrymandering and partisan districting is an ugly reality that no one really wants. Republicans and Democrats alike have been pushing for nonpartisan redistricting plan for the state, and we should do the same here in McLean County. It seems odd to any reasonable observer that Republican officials calling for bipartisan and transparent districting for our congressional districts then turn around and engage in an inaccessible and obfuscatory attempt to redraw the borders here at home. We need to maintain close access and understanding between our citizens and our representatives. Rural residents need someone who can speak to their needs, just as those living in Normal or Bloomington need someone local to them to respond to their concerns. Just as it is absurd that both Bloomington and Collinsville are represented by the same person in Congress, it would make no sense to have the same county board member represent Normal and Bellflower. Comments that some people have made that rural residents in McLean County need a larger disproportionate representation on the county board because Bloomington and Normal have their own strong governments to answer their needs are also absurd, as we all rely on the county for many centralized functions. We've seen this demonstrated most clearly in the last year with our reliance on the health department in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic and our attempts to vaccinate our population. Rural voters absolutely need county board members who understand their needs, but placing a thumb on the scale to increase their voting power does a disservice to all of us who share in the duties of paying our taxes and to all of us who use county services. These attempts to concentrate power in one party unfortunately raise the specter that this is a blatant attempt to minimize the voting power of the many minority groups in McLean County, the majority of whom are concentrated in Bloomington and Normal. As a member of McLean County's Indian community for over 40 years, I know that we have enjoyed and benefited from knowing that we have the opportunity to reach out to county board members who may not have understood us, but were willing to meet with us and try to learn. I know that my father when he was the former president of the McLean County Indie Association during the nascent years of that organization, worked with several county board members many years ago to plan activities that help celebrate our presence and participation in this wonderful community. That was critical to our community's ability, small as it was at that time, to embrace and be embraced by McLean County. Packing districts and at-large representation threatens that potential. It allows for control of the board to be concentrated in and hijacked by a much smaller, less responsive group of highly partisan activists who have no duty and no motivation to respond to citizen requests. At-large representation is generally accepted to be flawed. There is a reason it's been banned for federal elections. It's probably the single most litigated districting scheme simply because it is highly discriminatory. In the Supreme Court case Shelby County versus Holder, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg called at-large representation, vote stacking, and other gerrymandering schemes a second-generation barrier to minority voting. Concentrating nearly all of the county's minority voters into one district or abandoning responsive representation would gut the ability of these groups to have their interests represented. As many other callers have stated, we should open the reapportionment process and properly involve a wide variety of perspectives and positions without undue influence from outside actors or moneyed interests. The answer is not to cut the number of representatives or cut the number of districts, nor is it to switch to at-large representation or some hybrid model of the two. If anything, shifting the board to 20 single-member districts will allow the residents of our county to be better represented by people who understand and are aligned with the needs of their corner of the county, whether that be urban, suburban, or rural. However, what is probably the safest option, given the lack of timely census data, would be to maintain the current number of both board members and districts and avoid any temptation to redraw districts in a discriminatory manner. Again, I thank you for your time. Good evening.
Thank you. We'll now move down the bottom of the list to committee member Ms. Woolrab.
Thank you, Ms. There we go. Briefly, I just want to comment that public comment is important and enlightening, and I want to thank everybody who either called in or came tonight to share their thoughts. However, hearing from the public is not a substitute for insight and information and transparency of the committee's decision-making process. We need to know what criteria have been used in this, what data, what are the priorities, how are we going to measure the outcome as to compared to what we seek as the final result. Who had input into this process and who will have input into this process? And we need to know what options and alternatives have been considered when we talk about this at our upcoming meeting. I'd like to say that I want to thank Ms. Hines from the League of Women Voters for her very good comments on what the process can and should look like. I challenge this committee not only to make the process very clear and make it what consideration has been given to the voting voices of racial and ethnic minorities and of communities of interest. There are legal requirements, and failing to adhere to these legal requirements would make our decision very much in legal jeopardy. So I implore this committee to hear the call tonight to take into consideration not to ensure and diminish the voices of minority and communities of interest and let them be heard. So we will, I guess, discuss this more at our upcoming meeting. So thank you.
Thank you. I would also like to announce again, is Mr. A.J. Biancalana here? As he called in, Gavin Cunningham, Brenda Baker, Marcia Albritton, or Christopher Thompson? If not, well, that will conclude our public speaking for this evening. And so now we have had over 45 speakers from the public. It has been open to everyone from the public to answer some process questions. That's more than has ever been done by the county, and very similar to what the state is doing with their regional meetings, where they have selected either county or government officials or political representatives to speak in different regions, being that the state that they are, the size of the state that they are. Let me just say that from the county chairman's standpoint, I felt that a process had to have some kind of semblance, some control, some rules to follow. And by doing this with the executive committee, to me, it was the most logical thing to process to follow for the beginning. This is the first part of a process for determining the number of districts first and the number of members. And then later on, when that is determined, then another vote will, as I've announced previously more than once, for the maps that are going to be drawn. And we will have more public sessions in May for that, and I will give the dates at the end of this meeting. The criticism that the process is not open, then I don't believe that that has been the case, since it's been open to everyone in this county to come here and speak, or to call in and apply and speak. Yes, we do have representatives who were elected from everyone who, yes, will be voting on where this process goes eventually. And we'll be voting on the outcome of it. That's why we do have a board. I think the next thing, though, that we should be thinking about is that we have asked every board member to come and speak at this time in the initial process, and some have. They will also have the opportunity to speak at the next meeting, which is the rules meeting, at the next meeting, which is executive committee meeting, and then again at the full county board meeting, where anyone, again, can speak. Not only that, but if you don't understand public-wise the county rules, which would be very understandable, our county board rules say that any member of our county board can bring before our county board full meeting an item for action. Therefore, if you are a constituent and you have a board rep, I'm talking to the public now as well, or to the board members, if you do have something that you want to bring as an item for action, it's very possible. It's transparent. The key word here is we've opened this up, and our rules, as are established by our county board, make that very possible. Now, at this time, I know there's still some direction that needs to be given. Also, as I said at the beginning meeting, I asked our county administration, and thank you for following through and setting up these meetings for us, and to provide any information that is available at the current time. And the information that is available at the current time, as far as population data, is on the county website. And we will be providing even more as we go along. At the initial meeting, I also asked our county state's attorney's office to provide guidance and criteria and interpretation of the law. And at this time, I'm going to call on Mr. Spanos, Christopher Spanos, to address this committee and to the board and to the public for where we go from here with our process. Mr. Spanos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to apologize for what I'm about to read to you. I much prefer to discuss things in a more conversational manner, but I'll explain in a moment why I think it's important to actually read from this document. You'll understand in a moment. Some time ago, as the county turned its eye toward reapportionment, Chairman McIntyre and even Administrator Rodriguez mentioned to me that at some point I would be called upon to give this opinion or give some instruction from a legal standpoint. After receiving their request, given the complexity of the law, the fact that it only comes around once every 10 years, and the fact that I've not been involved in this process before, I knew that this would take some time to put together and my thoughts to help guide the board. I also knew that it would being prepared, that I would be prepared to provide input and guidance to the board before any vote was taken on reapportionment. With a vote coming later this week in Rules Committee, I want to summarize my review of the authorities. So why am I reading this? In one of the cases I reviewed out of Madison County, the appellate court quoted the words chosen by an assistant state's attorney that laid out the law for the board, much like I'm doing here today. That same court then analyzed whether the Madison County Board followed those directions. Therefore, I've reduced my thoughts to writing and believe that it is wise to read these thoughts into the record so that there can be no confusion. I began my research by reviewing the board packets, minutes, and agendas from 2011 to see what the board did during the last reapportionment process. I learned that in April of 2011, the board passed an ordinance setting the number of districts and the number of members of the board. This was done with no public hearings or meetings and no public input that I could find. The minutes from the executive committee meeting of April 12, 2011 indicate that after what appears to have been a very short discussion, the committee agreed to have a 20-member board elected from 10 districts. There was no mention of redistricting in any board materials thereafter until June 14th of 2011 in the executive committee agenda. That agenda identifies a discussion of the proposed redistricting as an item to be presented to the board, but no documents are attached to the agenda or contained within that committee packet. The minutes from this meeting indicate that a work session had taken place with board members regarding redistricting and that a draft proposal that emanated from that work session was distributed. I found no agenda, minutes, or packets from any work session in May or June of 2011 on the county board website that explained what took place at that time. The minutes do show that a discussion of moderate length took place regarding a couple of proposed amendments to the draft map proposal as presented. No formal vote was taken by the executive committee regarding supporting or opposing the draft proposal. Let's see that again. No formal vote was taken by the executive committee regarding supporting or opposing the draft proposal. The next mention of reapportionment from 2011 appears in the full board packet of June 21st, 2011. That packet contains a 12-page ordinance setting forth the current districts and legal descriptions and identifies the largest district having 17,867 citizens and the smallest having 16,436. It's roughly, I think, an 8% differential. The item passed 19-1 with member Casely voting against. The logic behind this process became very clear as I began to read the statutes and the case law, not just for the practical reasons of how a map could be drawn before knowing how many districts to include, but also the logical reasons for doing so were made clear when reviewing the list of court decisions that dictate the reapportionment process. From the 2011 board materials, I moved to the statutes and the case law and eventually was directed to the Illinois Constitution. I'm going to go off script for just a second. This is a very complex set of laws. And if you don't look at the Constitution, you may come up with different recommendations or understandings of what you may or may not do. Because I had not gone down this process, I didn't initially look to the Constitution. In retrospect, looking at the Illinois Constitution is the first place I should have looked. Article 7, Section 3 of the Illinois Constitution reads as follows. Section 3, County Board. A county board shall be elected in each county. The number of members of the county board shall be fixed by ordinance in each county within limitations provided by law. B, and this is the pertinent section. The General Assembly by law shall provide methods available to all counties for the election of county board members. No county, other than Cook County, may change its method of electing board members except as approved by countywide referendum. So that begs the question, what do they mean by method? Well, the Illinois Constitution mandates that a county board be elected in each county and empowers the county board to set the number of members by ordinance within the limitations provided by the General Assembly. It further directs the General Assembly to determine the methods available to all counties for election of county board members, then prohibits every county board outside of Cook County from changing its methods of electing board members without a binding county-wide referendum. Currently, the methods provided by the General Assembly for selecting county board members are at-large, single-member districts, multi-member districts, and a hybrid multi-member, single-member district option in some counties. Back in 1971, the McLean County Supervisors at that time chose to select its county board members using the multi-member district method. The county board in any year since, including 2021, does not have the authority to change the method of election absent a referendum. So I'm going to go off script again. We must elect a multi-member district method or it's unconstitutional. The case law shows that county boards sometimes miss this constitutional limitation when preparing reapportionment plans. This is understandable given the once-in-a-decade process. In the federal district court case of Walker versus the County of Winnebago, the board had to seek a court order to delay the deadline to file petitions once they realized that they could not reduce the board from 14 multi-member districts to 20 single-member districts. In the Illinois Supreme Court case of League of Women Voters versus Peoria, actually League of Women Voters of Peoria versus Peoria County, it is clear that it is a common mistake. People fail to review the requirements of the Illinois Constitution when drafting or proposing plans for reapportionment. Specifically, the Illinois Supreme Court stated or noted that it is the, quote, role of the electorate, the voters, in a referendum to choose between at-large, single-member, or multi-member district elections or any other appropriate method of election. And that was done in 1969, I think, when the referendum was initially done. Again, off script. After the method of election is determined by the voters, it is then the role of the county board to determine the appropriate number of members and districts. So again, that last sentence makes it very clear. After the method of election is determined by the voters, it is then the role of the county board to determine appropriate number of members and districts. It is likely a similar and understandable failure to review the Illinois Constitution that has led many people that we've heard from in the last few days to advocate, or a few weeks, for 20 single-member districts at these meetings. But make no mistake, a 20 single-member district plan passed by the McLean County Board would be unconstitutional. The question, of course, then becomes how many districts or members can be chosen by the board. Section 2-3002 of the county's code indicates that the board may consist of not less than 5 nor more than 29 members and may not exceed the size of the county board in that county on October 2nd, 1969. And again, I'm going to go off script for a second, but I found myself crawling through a vault outside of the county clerk's office to find the board records from October 2nd of 1969 to determine what the size of the board was at that time. It was 45 commissioners. So the way I read that, again, still off script, then we would be limited. The maximum number of members would be 29. I have reviewed the county board documents in the county clerk's office from 1969 through 1972. I also reviewed 1981. These records show that the McLean County Board on October 2nd, 1969 consisted of 45 members. In May, I didn't write the date down, in May of 1971, they passed the referendum, and then in 1972, the board was reconstituted with, at that time, I believe it was 27 members in 9 districts, so 3 members per district. So therefore, my direction to the board at this time regarding the parameters for the decision to be voted on first is that you must maintain multi-member districts and set the number of board members at no less than 6, which would be 3 members from 2 districts. Similarly, because the minimum is 5, but you can't have 5 if you got to have multi-member districts. So it's got to be, the minimum would be 6. Similarly, you can have no more than 29 members. Again, single-member districts would violate Article 7, Section 3 of the Constitution. As followed by this board in 2011, once the board has determined the number of members and districts, it is logical to move to the map drawing phase of the reapportionment process. When the map drawing phase begins, I will then brief the board on the rules and authorities applicable to that portion of the process. I want to go off script one more time and point out that in 2011, the number of districts and the number of board members was passed in April, and then the map discussion took place in June, and it was approved in June so that it could be in place by July 1st. Finally, while I don't want to jump too far ahead into legal theories applicable to the map drawing phase, it is likely that some have reviewed statutes or even case law that have heard about the theory of compactness. Please do not confuse that principle with the constitutional duty to select the number of districts and number of members. While it may seem counterintuitive, you can have a 2-district county board that meets the legal parameters of compactness, or you can divide McLean County up into a dozen or more districts that fail to meet the legal parameters of compactness. Simply put, meeting the compactness requirement is separate and distinct from the number of districts and the number of members on the county board. Through the Constitution of 1970, the people of the state of Illinois imparted on the county board the duty and authority to choose the number of districts and the number of members. Whether one person, one vote principles or principles of compactness are achieved or violated after the board exercises the constitutional duty will be determined based upon the final map that is drawn. As I noted, I will brief the county board at its May 13th full board meeting on those principles. As is my understanding, the map drawing process will then begin. And those are all the comments that I have prepared.
Thank you very much for that. That was a lot. I'm trying to catch up with you and all that was said. Is there anyone here on the committee that has a question? Member Erickson.
As I understand it, we're going to do a bifurcated process. Or bifurcated means we're going to do it in 2 parts. We're first going to determine the number of districts and the members per district.
Yes.
That'll be done in May.
Yes.
And then in June, we'll determine what the map is.
Yes.
My question is, if it's a 10-10 vote in May on the number of districts and the number of members per district, what happens?
That's why we have legal representation.
Well, let's.
It off. If the board cannot, this is off my script, Chuck, I didn't prepare this. If the board cannot come to an agreement on the redistricting process, then it goes to a committee. The committee is identified by statute, and then that committee will decide the plan. And the committee is made up of the state's attorney, the county clerk, the chairs of both the Democrat and Republican parties in the county, and a representative from the Attorney General's office.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned compactness being separate from the number of districts as we were thinking of it. Can you give us any more explanation of that, or give me particularly for that? And by the way, along with that question, you will be present at the rules meeting coming up in the rest of through our first part of our process for districts and numbers. Is that correct?
Yes, I
Okay.
will be present. And as far as the compactness goes with respect to the first stage, as I said, the number of districts and the number of representatives from each district, it has no bearing on that. The compactness will come into play as we prepare the maps. And I will be ready to give you a more detailed legal analysis of the map drawing phase at the next stage.
Will diversity come into play in the map drawing process, or in the number of districts? And, that was mentioned, and I'm just had it in my notes, and so I'm just curious when we go into that phase.
It's an interesting question. When I looked at the legislative history for the Illinois Voting Rights Act, there's some testimony from Kwame Brown, who at the time was a senator, and he was asked some very specific questions with respect to the intentions of that statute and its application to, let's say, get more minorities in office. And in fact, the answers are absolutely not, or no, no, no. It's not about guaranteeing that you have more minorities in office. It's about trying to make sure it's one person, one vote. And that's the objective of the map drawing, is one person, one vote, excuse me.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Assistant State's Attorneys panels? Well, then the next part of our process will be for the Rules Committee to consider all the testimony that we've had here, and also anything that's been placed on file or for the record. And then we will go back into our Executive Committee process to consider any proposals in the same way with our full board meeting. Again, exclusively for the number of members and the number of districts, as we've been discussing here. After that, for everybody's information, for our map process, we'll have two impact sessions, public impact sessions, and I've consulted with our county administrative office, and the first session, this will be after our full board meeting and the number of districts and members has been determined in May. The first session will be Tuesday, May 18th in this room at 4:30. Tuesday, May 18th at 4:30. Again, open to anyone from the County of McLean, anyone from the public, or any representative from organizations. The next meeting will be Tuesday, May 25th at 7 p.m., again here in this room. And again, it will be for anyone to come and present map drawings, place on file map drawings for consideration, again, by our Executive Committee. Yes, sir. Member Barnett.
May I ask a clarifying question? Those two meetings about the maps in May, will those be special meetings of the Executive Committee as these have been, or?
At the current time, yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes, they will be.
Thank you.
And we'll just follow the same process to remain consistent and follow the same rules that the board already has currently in place. And that will keep us from adopting any special rules to follow. And so hopefully that will be more consistent. Member Erickson.
I go back to this idea. It's not an idea. I don't know what to call it. I'm just thinking, what if we end up 10-10 in May? Can you still do a district process after that if you don't even know what the districts are going to be, or how many people per district you'd have?
No. I think the answer is no. That would go to a special committee. Is that correct, Mr. Spanos?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. If you can't come to an agreement, a majority opinion on the number of districts or number of representatives, then you can't draw a map. And if you can't draw the map, then it goes to the committee. If you can't agree to a map or redistricting plan, then it goes to the committee.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? Member Solner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So then, the next meeting will be the Rules Committee meeting, which is on May 6th
Yes.
at 5:45. Could you explain the process for public comment?
The public comment is the same as we have all of our rules, all of our committee meetings. This is a subcommittee of the executive committee, as you know, all of you know. It's the rules subcommittee. Public comment our county board rules will apply as they do to any committees. I believe that's correct. I may need an interpretation on that, but I believe that's what we have done in the past. And again, any other comments from other board members will be up to the opinion of the chairman of that committee. And we have that process in place.
So public comment, people need to notify the administration they would like to comment 24 hours before the meeting?
I believe it's 24 hours. Isn't that the rule at the time? Or is it 48 on that?
It's 24.
24 hours? Yes.
All right, thank you.
And I believe the time reserved for speaking is 5 minutes as well.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then at rules, it'd be limited to 30 minutes total.
The total aggregate time of speakers would be that without some kind of action from the committee.
That's the limit on our regular committee meetings.
Okay. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to everyone in the public. Thank you to all our speakers. Member Wendt?
Now, the way I understand it, if the Rules Committee doesn't come to any conclusion on what to do, we have current rules that say 10 members, 10 districts. So if we go into the Rules Committee and they come up with no solution, doesn't our current rules stand unless we vote to change our current rules? Then it goes on. If our Rules Committee makes no decision, wouldn't the current rules stand? Then if we couldn't agree on a map, like Chuck's talking about a 10-10 tie or even a 9-6 or 8, whatever it is, then that would go to that special committee and we'd have the 10-member districts like we currently have. Because I think the Rules Committee would have to vote to change the rules.
If the Rules Committee passed no recommendation, then it would be passed on to the next committee, and the rules as a subcommittee is a subcommittee to our executive committee, and that action would be passed on with no recommendation, as it just happened recently. And if that is the case, then it would be up to the executive committee to again weigh in on this.
Yeah, but then if the
and take
executive
action.
committee doesn't make any decision, and then the board doesn't make any decision,
Then it would go
then the
to a
rules
committee.
stand that we currently have, wouldn't it?
No, what would happen is we didn't come to any resolution as the state would be interpreted. Is that right, Mr. Spanos?
This is the statute. This is the language from the statute. This is rule section 2-3004, 55 ILCS 5/2. Failure to complete reapportionment. If any county board fails to complete the reapportionment of its county by July 1 in 2011, or any 10 years thereafter, or by the day after the county board's regularly scheduled July meeting in 2011, or any 10 years thereafter, the county clerk of that county shall convene the County Apportionment Commission. These 3 members of the commission shall constitute a quorum, but a majority of all members must vote. The commission shall adopt rules for its procedure, and it goes on, and that commission then will decide the reapportionment plan. and I can give you the whole copy of that statute if you'd like to read it yourself. It does not stand.
I mean, our current rules wouldn't stand.
The current rules, I'm not sure what you mean by the question.
Well, we
The
have a
current rule as far as the makeup of the board would not. The statute requires it go to the commission.
I kind of,
Thank you.
I don't quite understand how the rules that we already have, if we don't do anything, that those rules wouldn't just stand. And then the problem would be is the mapping. Then if we can't agree on the mapping, then it would go to this special committee that would have to follow the rules of our 10. They couldn't change that, I don't think.
I respectfully disagree with you,
Okay,
Member
well,
White. The way the statute reads is that if the apportionment plan, if you fail to complete reapportionment, it doesn't say if you fail to complete a map. It says if you fail
Yeah,
to
the
complete
reapportionment.
reapportionment. And the reapportionment process is laid out in the statute,
And does it say?
which means every 10 years, you have to
Yeah.
decide on the number of districts and the number of representatives every 10 years.
I'd have to reread that statute because I thought it just talked about the redistribution of the population.
Member Wolrab.
I'm looking for that in our rule book, but I see Mr. Wendt's point, because by default, I would think that the definition of our current number of districts would be what they are. If we couldn't agree to change them, then the agreement to the reapportionment is what's in the rule book. But I have to find it and I can't find it, so.
I don't know if I'm being clear enough on it.
I realize that the statute says that, but I would think that in this case, our rules would sort of not exactly override the statute, but would by default make our reapportionment be our current number of districts.
My opinion is, though, that the state statute supersedes any county board rules. And our county board rules are established for operation completely internally within our county board. And that's basically, Mr. Schmanos, you can correct me if I'm wrong with that.
I don't believe you're wrong, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. I have nothing else this evening, so at this time I'd like to adjourn this special executive committee board meeting this time. Sure, go ahead.
Well, this last discussion in my mind is moot because we have 7 members on the Rules Committee. If one member doesn't attend, that leaves 6, but the county board chairman can act as a member and to break a tie, I believe. Is that not correct?
The question about a possible tie-in vote in a subcommittee. If there was no, as our rules say, if there's a tie vote and no action is taken, this moves on from the subcommittee to the regular committee. And that is by our county board rules. And the same thing would happen in executive committee if it went on to the full board. Now, I thought we all understood that before we brought this up. Okay?
The only question I asked was when it got to the full committee.
Yes,
I know.
No.
I wasn't hung up on the rules.
No, I thought you had you were gonna add something else. All right, thank you. Okay, at this time, then I'm gonna recess this special committee meeting of the executive committee. I'm sorry? I'm adjourned. I'm sorry. Did I say dismiss? Adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming.